dream slipping away. It's more of what I hoped for slipping away. I just don't know how to let it go.
Friends, it's me, Meerab, welcoming you to Starspill USA, where today we step through the tall, weighty doors of a county courthouse into an atmosphere so charged it feels almost dangerous to breathe too deeply. A place where whispers are swallowed, where the scrape of a chair leg against the polished oak floor draws more eyes than a shouted word. Where the unassuming winter sunlight streaming in through high-arched windows casts pale, deliberate slashes across faces that hold every expression, from icy composure to trembling dread. And as we step into this space, the first sound we hear is the sharp, resounding strike of the gavel. Not merely a perfunctory knock of wood against wood, but an act that seems to split the air itself. The reverberation rolling through the room like the echo of distant thunder. A sound that carries with it the sense of something final, irreversible. A sound not of formality, but of unmasking. The kind of sound that announces to all present that the moment for secrets has passed. And that the long-cloaked truths are about to stand naked before strangers, and in that instant, without a single additional word being spoken. The courtroom falls into a silence, so total it becomes physical, pressing in on the ears and settling heavily on the chest. And in that silence, the knowledge settles on every soul present that they are not merely observing a legal matter, but bearing witness to the collapse of a kingdom. An empire not built on stone or steel, but on trust, loyalty, and the fragile architecture of carefully managed appearances. Meri Brown sits at the plaintiff's table, her back straight. Her shoulders drawn but relaxed in that way that only comes from months, perhaps years, of calculated preparation. Her hands resting calmly atop a leather-bound binder, whose neat stack of papers seems to glow faintly in the thin light. Each tab a silent testament to the hours she has spent in careful assembly. Her dark brown eyes fixed unwaveringly upon the judge, unblinking, unflinching. And if one were to look closely enough, they might see the faintest curl at the corner of her lips. Not a smile exactly, but a knowing, private expression of a woman who has rehearsed this moment in the private theater of her mind again and again, whose spirit has walked these steps long before her body did, and who has made her peace with what must be done. Across from her, Kody Brown sits stiff and uncharacteristically small. His frame drawn inwards, his golden curls hanging forward over a face stripped bare of the charm and theatrical energy that has for years been his weapon and his shield. The trademark smirk absent, the booming voice silenced, the expansive hand gestures reduced to the white-knuckled grip of clenched fists pressed so tightly together that the blood has retreated from his knuckles, leaving them pale and bone-like. And just behind him, Robyn stands as if caught between wanting to vanish and being unwilling to leave his side, a crushed tissue trembling in her hand. Her eyes already wet with unshed tears that shimmered dangerously with each blink. Her lips moving in the faint rhythm of a silent prayer or desperate plea, perhaps to the judge, perhaps to Kody, perhaps to some higher power that she suspects has already turned its face away from them. And yet her trembling betrays that she fears the answer will be no. The courtroom itself transformed into a grand stage for its most important performance. The tall windows cutting the space into panels of shadow and cold white light. The scent of aged varnish and old paper clinging to the air, and beneath it, all something sharper, almost metallic. The taste of tension that prickles at the back of the throat. While the benches are filled with an eclectic audience of sharp-eyed journalists, seasoned legal observers who watch every micro-expression, like hawks, and locals who have followed the infamous Sister Wives saga from its beginnings as a curious reality television experiment to its current standing as one of the most fraught family dramas in modern popular culture. And here they sit, pens poised. Above notepads, cameras ready to snap without flash. The quiet hum of whispered conjecture stilled instantly as the judge enters. A silver-haired woman with a kind of presence that stills rooms and commands attention without raising her voice. her reputation for slicing through theatrics and cutting straight to the truth preceding her like a herald, her gaze sweeping the room over the rim of her half-moon spectacles before she speaks. Her voice calm yet resonant. This court is now in session, and though the words themselves are simple, they land in the air like a stone dropped into still water. There, ripples reaching every corner of the room, even to the gallery where spectators straighten in their seats as if something in them recognizes instinctively that the story they are about to witness will be told and retold long after this day. Meri moves only slightly, a subtle shift of her posture, but it is not the nervous fidget of a woman unsure of her place. It is the deliberate adjustment of someone preparing to step into a role they have claimed entirely. And from the outset, the contrast between her and Kody is stark. Her papers laid out with the precision of a jeweler displaying priceless stones, scattered in haphazard, some folded, some creased, crammed into a manila folder that looks as though it was filled at the last possible moment. But what plays out here is about far more than paper and presentation. It is the culmination of a long and painful arc. The dismantling of a narrative once fed to millions as a vision of love and faith, a family united by shared belief and mutual respect. A story that, as the years passed, frayed and soured, revealing fractures that could not be disguised forever. Fractures born of choices made in private but exposed in public. Choices that saw Meri pushed to the edge of invisibility in the life she had helped to build. Her voice diminished, her influence eroded, until the day came when she understood that if she did not act to protect her own place in the story, she would have no place at all. And so, without the fanfare of cameras, without public declarations, she began to gather moments. Gather proof, gather the armor she would one day need. The small, seemingly insignificant scraps at first. A printed email pinned to a corkboard. A receipt slipped into a drawer, a note written in the quiet of her bedroom after a conversation in which a promise had been made and then quietly broken. And over the years, these scraps multiplied and coalesced into something formidable. A body of evidence that could not be waved away with charm or drowned out with grand speeches. And though she did not know exactly when she would use it, some part of her always knew the day would come. That day edged closer during the infamous dispute over the Coyote Pass property. A disagreement that played out in part on national television as a squabble over building plans. But behind the scenes was a fierce and personal battle for ownership, for control, for the right to decide the future of something she had invested in financially and emotionally. And when that conversation ended, Meri walked away with the sharp, cold clarity of a woman who understood at last that no one was coming to fight for her, and that the only person who could defend her interests was herself. So she picked up the phone, not to call a friend or a sister wife, but to dial a lawyer whose quiet, steady voice would become her compass in the months to follow. Their first meeting, tentative, exploratory. Meri not yet certain if she was prepared to take this all. The way to court, but laying out the facts nonetheless. Her hands steady as she recounted years of patterns and choices that had left her sidelined. And when she finished, the lawyer leaned back, weighing the words, before delivering the sentence that would lodge itself in Meri's mind like a seed, taking root. If even half of what you're telling me is true, you have a strong case. And from that moment forward, something in Meri shifted. Her movements became more deliberate, her focus sharpened. She gathered bank records, property deeds, contracts, communications. She constructed a timeline so precise it could not be picked apart. A map of years that revealed not merely neglect, but calculated exclusion. And in the wider Brown family, whispers began to circulate. Whispers that reached even Kody, who noticed the change and could not decide whether to be unnerved or dismissive. But he could not deny that Meri's silence was different now. No longer the silence of a woman resigned, but the silence of a woman plotting. A woman who no longer wasted her breath on arguments she knew she would lose because she had already chosen another battleground. And Robyn, for all her confidence in her position, felt it too. a faint but persistent unease at the glimpses she's caught of Meri's expression, not bitter, not even angry, but resolved. The kind of look that says the rules have changed and the game is no longer the same. The weeks leading to the court date unfolded like a tense, quiet march.
I think we're sister wives that are raising kids together, that were part of a plural family.
Meri keeping her public profile deliberately low, offering only the occasional cryptic post about self-worth and standing one's ground, while Kody, in contrast, doubled down on his public narrative, granting interviews in which he cast himself as a man struggling under the weight of an impossible situation, a figure of sympathy, even as in private he paced the floors at night. Restless and irritated by Meri's refusal to take his calls or be drawn into conversations aimed at clearing the air. Conversations she knew now were not meant to resolve anything but to draw her back into the familiar web. And by the time the legal papers were filed and the media caught scent, it was too late for charm to turn the tide. The headlines screaming of a sister wives courtroom showdown, online forums erupting with speculation, talk shows debating the likely outcome, and paparazzi staking out Meri's familiar haunts, waiting for a photograph that might reveal her strategy. And now here she sat in the pale winter light, the nation's eyes upon her, not as the sidelined wife fading quietly from the family portrait, but as the central figure in a battle that would redefine the Brown name, her binder of evidence a fortress in her lap, her composure unshaken as her lawyer rose to speak the first words of the case, each one striking the air like a hammer. And in that moment, in this room, heavy with history and the breathless anticipation of what was to come, it was clear to all who had the eyes to see it. Meri Brown had already taken back the reins, and there was no giving them up again. Essie Shortcard Denmurray did not mind the commotion. In fact, she seemed almost impervious to it, as though the bustle, the clicking of camera shutters, the murmured questions from reporters, and the subtle shifts of bodies angling for better vantage points belonged to some other reality altogether, one that had nothing to do with her. She wasn't here for the media, and she certainly wasn't here out of spite. Though to the casual onlooker, it might have been easy to mistake her composure for the cold satisfaction of revenge. No, she was here for reasons that ran far deeper, rooted in years of being silenced, sidelined, and slowly erased from the life she had once helped to build. For Meri, this trial was not a spectacle, it was a reclamation. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, she felt her hands on the wheel of her own destiny, and she was determined not to let go. The evening before the trial, she had sat in the quiet of her kitchen, a place where countless meals had once been prepared for a sprawling family, but which now stood as her private command center. The table between her and her lawyer was strewn with neatly stacked documents, timelines annotated in careful handwriting, and a yellow legal pad filled with her own notes, sharp reminders of what not to forget when the moment came. The air in the room was still, broken only by the soft rasp of paper sliding over wood or the click of a pen being uncapped. At one point, her lawyer leaned forward, tapping a fingertip against a particular section on the printed timeline. "You reach this point," he said quietly. "Stop. Let it sink in. The judge must feel it. Don't rush past it." Meri nodded once, her eyes steady, her mind already rehearsing not just the words she would speak, but the pauses between them, the silences that could weigh as much as the testimony itself. She had learned over the years that truth, when dropped with precision, could be heavier than any accusation. Meanwhile, across town in Flagstaff, the atmosphere in Kody and Robyn's home could not have been more different. There was no calm calculation here, only agitation that hummed beneath the surface like static electricity. Robyn moved about the living room in quick, jerky motions, her eyes red and swollen from tears. A half-packed bag sat open on the coffee table, a sad little kit for the day ahead. Inside were tissues, a small bottle of headache medicine, a granola bar, and a neatly folded note she'd tucked in almost unconsciously, though she knew she wouldn't read it in court. "It's just something to have," she murmured to herself. When Kody had asked what it was, he hadn't pressed her for an answer. His mind was elsewhere. He sat hunched on the couch, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on some invisible point on the far wall, muttering under his breath about how things had come to this, how this was never supposed to be the way the story ended. His charcoal gray suit jacket was already creased from the way he slouched, the fabric betraying the lack of care he'd shown in preparing himself. He'd been a man used to control, to having the last word in any disagreement, but today he seemed unsettled in a way that went beyond ordinary nerves. The following morning, the courthouse steps might as well have been a stage, with every inch occupied by members of the press, by onlookers, and by the curious who had come to witness the drama firsthand. Journalists jostled for position there, elbows finding ribs as camera lenses lifted and microphones extended like the antennae of some restless swarm. The air was alive with the staccato pop of shutters and the low hum of questions tossed into the air without expectation of answers. Meri arrived first, stepping from the car in a sharp navy suit that fit her with the crisp precision of armor. The cut of the jacket, the polished shine of her low heels, and the way her hair had been neatly pinned back all spoke to a woman who was prepared not merely to attend court, but to command it. She kept her gaze fixed on the heavy courthouse doors ahead, not slowing, not glancing at the huddled cameras, not even twitching at the questions that flew at her, like darts questions about property, about motives, about whether this was for the cameras. Her lawyer matched her stride, a silent shadow at her side, their shared focus making them appear less like client and counsel and more like co-conspirators in some high-stakes maneuver. Minutes later, Kody and Robyn arrived. Robyn's dark sunglasses covered much of her face, though not the slight tremor in her mouth or the way her jaw clenched. She kept hold of Kody's arm, her fingers curled tightly around the fabric of his jacket. Kody, for his part, avoided looking at the press altogether, his eyes scanning the pavement as though it might open and swallow him whole. The tension between the two arriving parties was almost physical, an invisible cord strung taut between them before they'd even set foot inside the courtroom. Inside, the room filled quickly, the air growing heavier with each occupied seat. This was not, as some might have framed it, a dispute over mere property or a ledger's balance. This was about something larger: pride, vindication, the right to stand before the world and say without flinching, "I was wronged and I will not be silenced any longer." The judge entered, his expression as unreadable as polished stone, and the low murmur in the gallery subsided into expectant stillness. Meri rose when called, and the shift in the room was immediate. Conversations, movements, even breaths seemed to slow. All eyes were on her, some openly curious, others quietly supportive, and a few clearly hostile, but Meri seemed immune to them all. She walked with a deliberate grace toward the witness stand, her steps measured, her posture unyielding, every inch of her presence speaking of someone who had rehearsed not just her words, but her very bearing. The clerk approached, with the Bible, the familiar oath delivered in a steady tone. "Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Meri's reply came cool and even. "I do." She adjusted the microphone with careful precision and folded her hands neatly on the wooden surface before her. Her lawyer began with a deceptively simple question. "Mrs. Brown, can you explain your position in the family during the time you were married to Mr. Brown?" Meri drew a slow breath, not to gather courage. She had arrived with that already, but to gather the memory in its entirety before setting it down. She spoke without bitterness, her tone even, her words carrying the weight of lived truth that required no embellishment. She described the early years, the financial sacrifices made not just by her but collectively, the endless hours managing the household and supporting Kody's vision of a plural family that would stand as a monolithic example to others. She recounted her contributions to communal properties like Coyote Pass, her work in managing joint finances, and the implicit understanding, spoken and unspoken, that what they built together would be shared equally. Her words made Kody's lawyer shift in their chair, sensing the trap already taking shape. Then came the pivot. "Mrs. Brown," her lawyer asked, voice dipping into something firmer, "when did you sense that your position in the family began to change?" Meri's gaze did not falter. When Robyn entered the scene, she said simply, "From that point, decisions, family and financial, were made without me. I was told I'd be included, but when the time came, I was excluded deliberately." A ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery. Robyn's eyes dropped to the floor, her tissue twisting between her fingers. Exhibit A was introduced, a series of text messages projected onto courthouse screens. They were plain, direct, and damning. Kody stating that profits would be redirected into Robyn's shop instead of the agreed-upon Coyote Pass Fund. Meri objecting. Kody responding, "Plans change. I'm the head of this family, and I'll decide where the money goes. Where the money goes."
I'm curious though, did that come out of fear?
It was a very brief moment.
The final sentence landed in the room like a thunderclap. Gasps escaped from several in the gallery, and even the judge's expression tightened. Meri did not look triumphant. She merely laid out the facts, explaining the breach, the witnesses present during the original agreement, and the silent shift in how funds were allocated without her knowledge or consent. Bank statements followed, their highlighted sections tracing a clear and consistent pattern of withdrawals and transfers that bore no resemblance to the jointly agreed budgets. When Exhibit C appeared, a printed email in which Kody had written to a family advisor, "Meri is no longer included in the inner circle regarding finances. We must restrict her access to the accounts." The tension spiked. Meri's voice stayed steady, but her words cut clean. "When I read that email," she told the judge, "I knew the marriage was over, not just emotionally, but legally. This wasn't a family anymore. This was a man shutting me out of everything I had built." Objection overruled, and Meri continued, recounting how contracts were signed without her. Loans taken, assets shifted, her name absent from every decision. She spoke of the emotional cost, the public humiliation when Kody declared their marriage over on national television. The years she had kept silent to protect the family's image, only to be systematically erased. Each point was backed with documentation, records, minutes, messages, leaving no space for dismissal. By the time her lawyer finished, the mood in the room had altered. This was not a performance of the bitter ex-wife trope some might have expected. This was the unflinching account of a woman armed with proof. Kody's cross-examination stumbled against her composure. "Didn't you voluntarily step back from decision-making?" his lawyer asked. Meri's head tilted slightly, the faintest smile playing at her lips. "I didn't step back," she said. "I was pushed. There's a difference." When she left the stand, the damage to Kody's defense was visible in his clenched jaw. His tightly interlaced fingers gone white at the knuckles. Robyn's tear-streaked face was turned away from him, her eyes fixed on some point beyond the wall. As the judge called a recess, Robyn shot from her seat, her heels striking the wooden floor in sharp, quick beats. Outside, the air was cold, and the media was ready. Questions flew about the testimony, about Coyote Pass, about the future of her marriage. She said nothing, clutching her bag to her chest, eyes darting toward the courthouse doors as though willing Kody to appear and pull her away from the swarm. Inside, he remained seated, his lawyer's quiet warning holding him in place. Robyn's voice cracked like glass under pressure. That was the turning point," she stammered, her breath hitching between syllables. This is so cruel." Her head shook in disbelief, hair brushing against her damp cheeks as fresh tears streaked down without pause. She turned abruptly from the mass of cameras, retreating toward a shadowed corner of the courthouse steps where a uniformed security guard tried without much success to shield her from the pressing media. Behind her, the air was alive with the shuffle of reporters repositioning, the metallic click of camera shutters, and the sharp barked calls of journalists desperate for a quote. Back inside, the scene was just as tense, but the noise was of a different sort of muffled. Layered hum of voices, chairs scraping, and papers shuffling during the court recess. Kody was pacing within a tight radius near the defense table, hands clenching and unclenching as though ready to explode. The sound of his shoes against the polished floor was swallowed by the chatter. But to him, all of it was drowned beneath the thudding drumbeat of his own heart hammering in his ears. His lawyer stepped forward, his voice clipped but measured. "You need to stay calm. Kate, we can challenge parts of her testimony, but I'm not losing my temper," Kody snapped, his voice sharper than intended. A few heads turned toward him at the sudden volume, and he immediately lowered his tone, casting a glance toward the door Robyn had just fled through. "She's falling apart out there," he muttered. "Then let her," the lawyer replied, coolly. "If the cameras catch her crying, it could work in your favor. Public sympathy." Kody's jaw tightened, resentment coiling in his expression, but he said nothing. He understood the importance of optics, but he also knew that no amount of optics could erase the mountain of paper evidence. Meri had just methodically laid before the court. In the corridor beyond the courtroom doors, Robyn was pressed against the wall, her breathing ragged, shallow gasps that seemed to scrape at her throat. A court employee extended a fresh tissue toward her, but her trembling hands barely managed to grasp it. A woman, a sister-in-law from a previous marriage, had slipped into the hall to comfort her. She moved quickly, placing a hand on Robyn's shoulder. "You have to pull it together," she whispered urgently. "They see you like this. How am I supposed to pull it together?" Robyn cut in, her voice cracking with both outrage and despair. "When she's making it sound like we stole from her, like every single thing we ever did was rotten." The words echoed down the corridor, pulling the eyes of passing staff and curious onlookers. Though cameras weren't permitted here, several phones were discreetly raised, their lenses catching the raw moment in shaky frames. Her mind drifted and bidden back to late nights in the Flagstaff house. Lying in bed beside Kody, she remembered telling him, her voice low in the dark, "If this ever goes to court, they'll turn me into the villain." He'd brushed it off then, muttering that no one could twist the truth if there was nothing to hide. But now, after hours of hearing Meri's calm, unflinching testimony, Robyn knew her fear had not been paranoia. In the court of public opinion, the shift had already begun, her image sliding from favorite wife to homewrecker in the eyes of viewers. Back in the courtroom, the Whisper Network was buzzing at full speed. Journalists scribbled furiously in notepads, sketch artists deepened the lines on Robyn's tear-streaked face, and legal commentators exchanged low, concerned glances. They didn't need a verdict to recognize which way the tide was flowing. One reporter discreetly texted their editor Robyn just completely lost it outside their footage. Another leaned toward her colleague, murmuring, "Tomorrow's headlines are going to be brutal if this keeps up." After 10 long minutes, Kody's resolve cracked. Against his lawyer's warning, he left his seat and strode toward the hallway, his heavy steps bordering on a stomp. When he found Robyn, she was hunched on a bench, her face hidden in her hands. Dropping into a seat across from her, he leaned forward until his hands gripped her knees. His voice was low, but the edge in it was razor sharp. "You can't do this here," he growled. "They're eating this up." Robyn lifted her tear-blurred eyes. "I can't sit there and listen to her twist everything. She's not twisting it," Kody began, then caught himself fumbling for a correction. "I mean, she is, but we'll spin it back. You just have to hold it together for the cameras. You can't look anything but united." When they returned to the courtroom, Robyn's transformation was noticeable, but far from complete. She had reapplied her makeup, blotted away the tears, even smoothed her hair. But the lingering flush around her eyes betrayed the earlier breakdown. The judge's entrance cut through the remaining murmur. All rise. The proceedings resumed, but the balance had shifted. The stark contrast between Meri's poised, meticulous testimony and Robyn's emotional unraveling hung over the room like a verdict in itself. In the back row, two longtime fans of the family lean together, whispering. She's cracking because she knows they're cornered. The other shook her head, or because she's terrified of losing it all. The truth, they agreed, didn't matter. Both interpretations hurt. As the questioning continued, Kody's simmering anger began to bleed through. He bounced his knee, whispered sharply to his lawyer, and sent Meri the kind of fleeting but piercing looks that even caught the judge's attention. When Meri's lawyer brought up Exhibit C, the email in which Kody had written about restricting her access to money, Kody let out a pointed snort. "Mr. Brown," the judge warned.